There we go. Okay. I really do know how to use a computer. No, I don't. Maybe I should just talk. Hold on 1 second. It's gonna happen. It's gonna work. Where's my mouse? There we go. You know what? I think this is just telling me to just not use my notes. I'm just gonna go with the. I'm just gonna go right into the talk. Okay. Okay, let's go. All right, thanks for your patience. So my name is Christina, and I'm here today to just talk about the importance of building a strong front-end foundation. So I have a couple links in the slides to things. So if you want to follow along, you can go to bit.ly/c/DevTO if you want to just click on the links too. So before I get started, just a quick intro about who I am. So I've been a front-end developer for 10 years now. So 2016 marks 10 years. So I've worked at a couple agencies. I worked at TNL Labs and at Razorfish, software company, mutual funds. So I've tried a few different places. The last 4 or 5 years I've been teaching, so I taught for a couple years at Humber. And most recently I was the director of curriculum at Ladies Learning Code, where I developed most of the adult-based content for the workshops and the part-time program. So I actually just quit a month ago. So I'm the HBIC now of myself. So quick pitch is, so what I'm trying to do now is I want to create learning opportunities for existing developers, new and existing developers. So I spend a lot of time teaching beginners. And I've noticed that there's usually a big gap between leaving school and actually working. So I want to be able to create sort of a learning environment for those of us who are getting into the industry, already in the industry, and want to just keep moving. So I'll be doing technical skills training, but what I really want to focus on is soft skills training, which is pretty much all the stuff aside from coding that you need to know how to do to sort of make it in this biz. So quick pitch, if that sounds interesting to you, sign up for the mailing list for updates. And I also teach body pump at Good Life Fitness, hence that. So if you want to work out, we could do that together too. Teaching class tomorrow on Thursday. All right, so I started in 2006. Actually, one of my classmates is here today. So when we started out, front-end dev basically looked like this. You wrote HTML, CSS, JavaScript. jQuery was cutting edge at the time. The first stable release was released maybe about a month before I finished school, so that was like the big deal. Moon Tools, I'm not even sure if it's still being used. Anybody remember Moon Tools? Flash for animations, and dabbled in a couple of other things. But these days, front-end kind of looks like this. So you still have your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but that maybe list has grown a lot longer. So the thing about having these tools is it helps us to better our workflow, allows us to do things that previously before you had to use back-end languages. But with more options comes more opinions. And us devs are really opinionated. We can't even agree on whether we should use tabs or spaces. So I know it's a little bit small, so if you can't see it, I just posed the question of, hey, tabs or spaces, and it's basically 50-50. So check out the link at the bottom. It's a discussion with some notable folks in dev, and you can see how we all seem to have a different idea of what front-end dev is like these days. So now that we're using a lot of these frameworks and tools, we have sort of this extra layer to our workflow, right? So the thing about using these tools is it also adds an additional layer of learning. And not only that, the learning is very specific to the framework or the tool that you're using. The thing is, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way, but with all these new tools coming out, it almost feels like it's quite overwhelming. Should I use Angular? Should I use Ember? I just figured out how to use Sass, and now we have Post-CSS, or there's always something latest and greatest coming up, right? So it can feel a little overwhelming to try to stay up to date. But what I really want to focus on is no matter what tools you choose, at the end of the day, you're still writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You just have different ways of writing it. So how many of you have heard this piece of advice when learning? Right? So I hate it. And the reason why I hate this is I feel like if we keep telling each other to fake it, then who is ever going to know what they're doing if we're all just faking it? Right? So usually what follows after that is, oh, it's just imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome was coined by a couple of psychologists back in 1978. But recently it's become sort of a very popular term we've started using to pretty much describe any sort of feelings of I don't know how to do something. But imposter syndrome actually means when you achieve something, you're unable to attribute that success to yourself. You keep saying, oh, I was just lucky. You keep attributing it to external factors. And then you're afraid of being exposed as an imposter because you don't believe you deserve that success. It's not the same thing as learning. So when you're learning, you don't know how to do something because you're learning. And you need to embrace that you don't know how to do something. So the reason why I don't like these as advice for learning is that it takes away from the actual learning process. It gives you an excuse to not get used to that uncomfortableness of learning something. So instead of saying fake it till you make it, what I think we need to do is to create a culture that allows us to say, I don't know how to do this. To create a culture where we're not posturing and feigning surprise. You don't know how to do this yet? The shaming and the posturing. Take the time to actually learn and get better at something, and then your confidence will naturally come with actually knowing how to do something. So I'm not saying that you have to be an expert. I'm not saying that you have to master HTML, CSS, and JavaScript first before you jump to these tools. All I'm saying is that you need to make sure you understand the foundation before you jump to the tools. The tools are there to help you, but you're the one who's running the tools. So this is also something when I was early in my career, I thought that I wasn't good enough as well because I really liked to write HTML, CSS, but they're not real programming languages. So the idea is that, oh, it's easy, anyone can do it, let's move on. But as I've started to work, and the longer I've been in the business, I've seen intermediate and senior developers write HTML and CSS that is not following best practice, shall we say. So I've come to realize that we need to give this the same respect as all these other programming languages because it really is the basis for everything else that is built on top of it. So I want to show this example because this is a screenshot of a real project that I worked on. Maybe I can zoom it in.
You worked on that car?
Yeah, I worked on the car. It's not zooming in. So if you can see how this CSS is, this is what I felt like when I was trying to make changes. And this was written by a senior developer. And this was also written after I created a framework and a coding style guide. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that everyone needs to respect this process, especially if you're working on a team. Because you need to make sure that it's written in such a way that you can add on to it later and you don't end up like this. So, again, use frameworks, use tools, all that stuff is there for you to use. Just remember to apply the best practices that these languages are based on. So this is a short talk, so I won't be able to go into all the nitty-gritty details of all these tips and tricks that you should know, but I just want to highlight a few things that we can keep in mind when we're starting to build out the basic parts of our projects. So just some quick HTML tips in terms of remembering to keep your tags, semantics, and headings and stuff. So HTML was originally created for research documents. So it was pretty easy to define what's your heading, what's your paragraph, what's your list, right? But you can think of your heading outline as a table of contents. So again, it's very text-based and it's really easy to follow along. You have your main headings, your subs, and then your headings within your subsection. But our websites tend to look more like this these days, right? So it's not this nice, neat table of contents. So what I've seen is that in teaching and stuff, that when we see designs like this, it's really tempting to say, oh, I'm going to follow that heading hierarchy and just go H1, H2, H3. But if you take a look at it in terms of it being an outline, it doesn't really make sense for the 2 lines down there to be headings because they're not actually titles that introduce any content. So you can use your HTML5 semantic tags instead, put it in a paragraph, because it is still part of introductory information. You could put them inside of a header and then use an article tag. For example, just to give it a name. So there's nothing wrong with using divs here if you want to, but these HTML5 tags have been out for a long time, so just use them. And they'll just give you a little bit more semantic meanings and better accessibility, all that good stuff. So if you haven't seen HTML5doctor.com, that's my favorite website for trying to figure out how to use HTML5 tags properly. So check that out. So that was just a quick reminder, I guess, to use your proper HTML5 semantic tags. Another thing that you should probably want to do is to separate your JavaScript from your CSS. So I'm a really big stickler for naming conventions and being consistent. So one thing you could do is you can use IDs just for JavaScript and then classes just for your CSS. But since you can only use IDs once per page, another option is you can use your prefix instead, just for JavaScript. So that way when you delete something or when you move something, you know that only JavaScript is tied to this. You know that only CSS is tied to this. Another option that I like to use is to use a data attribute. You can use it with and without a value. So you can use it as a hook for your JavaScript, but you can also add a value, and then you can do more JavaScript things with it, I guess. But with different selectors also affects the performance. So again, if you haven't heard of this jsperf.com, it's a pretty cool site for testing web performance. So keep in mind, IDs are actually the fastest in terms of performance because it knows only to search for one thing, because in theory you should only have one ID, right? So then if you use an ID, it'll find that selector the fastest. Class names and data attributes, because it knows that there's going to be several throughout the page, it's going to look for all of them, so it takes a little bit longer. But if you're working on a small project, these are like milliseconds of differences. So it might not affect your performance that much if it's a smaller site. But if you're working on something big like Amazon.com or something, then these little bits of performance will probably make a bigger difference. So again, I was saying I'm a big stickler for naming conventions, so please use functional names. Personally, okay, warning, personal opinion here, I would prefer straightforward names than clever names. So use something that will make sense to everybody. So red button, you want to avoid that because your designer might come back to you and say, oh, I want it to be orange. And then you have a red button that's orange. So think of using functional names. Use a name that describes what it does and not what it looks like. So this is something new that I've been trying out. So for those of you who have used grid layouts, you've probably seen classes like this, right? Something like that to indicate that this has 4 columns, 3 columns. So this is something new I've been trying out just to help me visualize how the grid's going to change for the different screens. So again, maybe this is me being a little too picky, but when I go down to mobile and I see a class that says grid 4 and there's only 1 column, it kind of just throws me off. So I've started to use this as my naming conventions just to denote the different grid styles.
Neither one of those are semantic.
They're not semantic?
Yeah.
How so?
Because you're tying it to your layout and not to the meaning.
Yes. So in this case, because this class is specific just for layout, I wouldn't, like say for example, for a good point, for example, if I was to use a class name like this is literally just to create the columns. I wouldn't put font styles in here. I wouldn't put colors and stuff. So it is literally just to create 4 columns. Yeah. And so for bigger projects, there are some resources that you might want to check out. There's using BEM for your naming, and this other process called SMAX. So it's really good for organizing your code into modular sections, naming conventions, all that good stuff. Okay. And writing CSS. This seems to be like the best gift to describe what writing CSS is like. So, considering with everyone laughing, you all know why this makes sense, right? So I'm just going to go over quickly the idea of getting to know how to use different CSS selectors, just knowing what the options are available, will help you figure out which ones might be the most efficient. So I'm just going to use this button as an example. So there's a lot of selectors that are just not used as commonly, but they can work well in your favor. So here's a simple button example. So let's say I make a bunch of buttons, they're all the same except for they're different colors. So I can use one class for all the common stuff, and then I can use a specific class name just to change that one feature that's a little bit different. So this way is pretty commonly used. But I also really like using the attribute selector and the asterisk to create sort of like a pattern matching. So in this case, if I do it this way, I can get rid of that button class. Because what this does is, here's my attribute selector with the square brackets. So I'm going to say look for anything with a class of button. But by adding this asterisk at the beginning, it's going to match just that word in the class. So now if I name everything button dash something, this is going to match just that portion, and then add all the styles, and then you can still use the specific ones for the specific changes. So this is just a nice way of getting rid of one extra selector in your HTML. And finally, I've actually just used this for the first time last week. So it's the negation pseudo class. So this is kind of cool because you can specify what not to apply the style to. So if I combine it with the previous example, let's say I have a regular link, not a button or anything, by using the not and saying any link except for the one with the class of button, apply this style. So by doing that, if I just added it to the A, then this would also load that color, and then it would have to override that color with whatever you set here. So by adding the negation, nothing gets overridden. This will only apply to this, and then whatever you put the button only applies to that. So it can be a little handy when you know there's just one specific instance that you don't want this style to apply to. So I've been referencing this article right here for years. So I find it's a really good resource just to see all the different ways that you can use lesser known selectors. And just knowing these different options again will just help you figure out what's the most efficient way for you to achieve the effect that you're trying to go for. And finally, the last thing is try to write your CSS as modular as possible. So you want to think of everything as these little components that you can reuse over and over again. You want to make sure that it works in isolation of its surrounding markup. So if we're thinking about that button example again, I could put that in a span tag, I could put that in a div, I could put that in a link, and the styles will still work because all the styles were attached to that button name, not div button, span button, or whatever. So I think this is really helpful to bring designers and developers together, is to create some kind of collection of common elements, so a bit of a style guide. So I actually created this for my own website, just to help me see everything together. What I was finding that when I was writing CSS for specific portions of my page, I ended up with like 10 different font styles, different font sizes. When I first started, I had an extra small and an extra small, and it was literally 0.1 rem difference. So by having it all together in this style guide, it just helps me to see how things look on their own. So I know that this block works on its own, and I could literally take this class and this HTML markup and put it anywhere and it'll work. And I really like it for when you have different options for the same thing. So here are all my buttons, and I can try out all the different styles, see them together, make sure they work well on their own. There's my little grid stuff. With designers on a few projects, and I just find it helps to sort of have designers and developers talk this way. And you can just see how everything works together. And then it becomes easy for designers too, because then they can sort of plug pieces in, as well as developers. Then you can just have, it's basically like Lego, I guess, right? You build the little pieces and then you put them together. Okay, I have no idea how long I've been talking for, but that's pretty much all I have for you. Again, this is just sort of an overview and maybe maybe this is me being old and saying, like, back when I was in school, I had to walk 6 feet of snow to get to school. But all I'm saying is let's not forget the language that we're starting off with and get good at that so that we can bring our good practices into whatever tools you decide to use. Okay.
You have a question? Take a couple of questions.
Yes?
Can I see the link for your slide again?
Sure. It is, go back. bit.ly/ct-devto. Anybody else? Yep. Oh, no, that was not a hand. Any other questions? I thought I heard something.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
It's from the
That's
trough.
not a question. So that means everyone here writes really good front-end code? Yeah? Okay, I'm going to view source all your website. All right, cool.
Awesome.